What does it say about Penny Wong, though, and her relationship inside the government, her power inside the cabinet? Because when she flagged this in a speech about a month or so ago, there was a visceral reaction to it. Now, the PM came out quickly. He sort of said, nothing to see here, poured cold water on the idea, said that Labor's position hadn't changed. Now, clearly, he was either lying back then and he knew this was coming, and we know there's a long lead time on these negotiations in the UN, as you and I both know through our ambassadors, or the Prime Minister's been rolled. What is it, Dennis?
Well, look, there is no doubt that this was a long-term calculated policy. Before the election, we had the national conference of the ALP change its policy. It was then just said, oh, no, it doesn't really count. We're just doing it to keep things quiet. Then Penny Wong gave a speech which immediately showed there was going to be a change in Labor policy. The Prime Minister then used the same language that he had used when the tax changes were being put up, saying, oh, we haven't changed them. He didn't say, oh, by the way, we're actually thinking about this. And more importantly, what we've seen here is, of course, Penny Wong has a very powerful position in the cabinet, and her position on this policy has actually prevailed. But what we are seeing is an inability of this government to actually argue a case. If they wanted to change the policy, why didn't they put it out there, as Penny Wong did a month ago, and say, we are changing it, and argue and take in the Australian public, the Jewish community as well, and say, this is why we are doing it. Instead, they effectively mislead the public and say, oh, we haven't changed our position because it didn't change until they voted in the UN. This is a very weak approach to public policy, and it's a repudiation of the handling of this whole issue by both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister. They should have been upfront. It's what they wanted. Well, convince the Australian people that it was the right thing to do. I think in the way they've gone around about it, apart from the fact I think it was the wrong decision, they haven't actually convinced too many people at all that they've behaved properly.
It's true, Dennis, for you to pick up the gutlessness in terms of their advocacy for their position. I think people will accept, and John Howard had plenty of these, where the government needed to change position, where they needed to go down a course that perhaps wasn't popular at the start, but they were happy enough to argue it out. This government says, no, we're not doing it, nothing to see here, until such time it changes in the middle of the night. I think that's one of the problems they've got. They've got a problem there on the carbon tax. I'll get to that in a moment with another guest. But just before we go, 3 boats, 3 illegal boat arrivals on or near our shores in just the last week. We went through those in the package a moment ago, but it's hard to deny now, Dennis, these people smugglers, they are back in business.
Well, if you'll forgive the pun, they're definitely testing the waters. And I think given that the last 3 boats in this last week, only one of the 3 was actually detected on the water by aerial surveillance. One group arrived in the Torres Strait Island, had already been on land, and in the other group, the boat had failed. It was the only reason it was picked up on the Cocos Islands. So what we're actually looking at is a obvious testing by people smugglers to test our borders, to test the physical ability for us to stop people coming, and the moral strength of the government to say we will not allow people to stay and to send them back.
And of course, if you're a rapist or a criminal or anyone who refuses to go home, you get to stay here on welfare, and that's the sort of story that's going around the world into these people smuggling networks. Dennis, have a good budget week. We'll catch up with you next week.